Hello everyone. Originally I had planned to start a video series on eschatology this month, but unfortunately I've been too busy to do that, so I'm doing a couple of standalone videos instead. I already finished my series on sacramentology this past summer, but I thought of a couple things I could add to it. So in this video I'm going to talk more about how baptism relates to circumcision. As I discussed in my baptism videos already, baptism is the New Covenant version of circumcision. This is what Presbyterians and some Baptists like me think, but other Baptists believe that regeneration is the New Covenant fulfillment of circumcision. But let me explain why that just doesn't work. Firstly, many assume that circumcision was the entrance into the Old Covenant, and then because regeneration is obviously entrance into the New Covenant, therefore regeneration is the fulfillment of circumcision. But the problem with that is that circumcision was not entrance into the Old Covenant. Genesis 17:7 and 11-14 says, "And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be gone to you and to your seed after you. And you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations, one who is born in the house, or one who is bought with money from any foreigner who is not of your seed. A servant who is born in your house, or who is bought with your money, shall surely be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. But an uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." So first of all, God says, "I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you," which means the covenant was not just with Abraham himself, but also with all of Abraham's seed. People who believe regeneration is circumcision argue that this covenant was only made with Abraham and involved his own regeneration, but that would create a huge problem because the new covenant is the fulfillment of the old covenant and was established with all true believers who are called the seed of Abraham. If the Abrahamic covenant was only made with Abraham alone, then why are all true believers called his seed in the new covenant? Why would that matter? That makes no sense. Second, God says, "An uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." It is obvious that you cannot break a covenant that you are not already a part of. Two unmarried people cannot commit adultery with each other or divorce one another. But it says here that if a male descendant of Abraham or a male in Abraham's household does not get circumcised, he has broken the covenant that God made with Abraham and his seed. God says circumcision is the sign of the covenant, meaning you were circumcised as a sign of having already entered into the covenant. And think about this. If circumcision itself was the entrance into the Old Covenant, then no woman could have ever been in the Old Covenant, which is absurd. So obviously physical descendants of Abraham entered into the covenant simply by being born, precisely because of the fact that the covenant was not just with Abraham but also with his seed. And the servants who were bought with money from foreigners didn't enter the covenant by circumcision either, but by being bought and brought into the house of Abraham. And now, in the new covenant, we become part of Abraham's seed at spiritual birth instead of physical birth because Christ bought us with his blood. This is what Presbyterians get wrong. They are not wrong to equate baptism with circumcision. Equating physical circumcision with regeneration is what throws everything off. Now secondly, Colossians 2:9-13 says, "For in him all the fullness of deity dwells bodily, and in him you have been filled, who is the head over all rule and authority, in whom you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, and the removal of the body of the flesh, and the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you being dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive with him, having graciously forgiven us all our transgressions." So Paul talks about circumcision here, but it is a circumcision made without hands, which clearly is regeneration. Some people use this to argue that regeneration is the fulfillment of circumcision, but that actually doesn't follow upon closer examination of the passage. Paul also says we are buried and raised with Christ in baptism through faith, and he is clearly talking about spiritual baptism here, not physical baptism, because physical baptism is done with hands, and it is not what saves us. So spiritual circumcision is the same thing as spiritual baptism, and both of them are what regeneration is. Therefore, physical circumcision corresponds to physical baptism as well. Here is a table demonstrating the connections between the Old Covenant and New Covenant signs. As you can see, entrance into the Old Covenant was by physical birth for descendants of Abraham, or by being bought with money by a physical descendant of Abraham for servants. Whereas entrance into the New Covenant is by spiritual birth, which is regeneration, due to being bought by the blood of Christ, so you become Christ's servant. Spiritual circumcision and spiritual baptism are both the same as regeneration, and the sign of having entered into the covenant was physical circumcision in the Old Covenant and is physical baptism in the New Covenant. So in conclusion, what some Baptists unfortunately get wrong is that they think regeneration is the New Covenant fulfillment of circumcision based on a misinterpretation of Colossians 2. But other Baptists like me, as well as Presbyterians, believe that baptism is the fulfillment of circumcision instead. What Presbyterians get wrong is that they think entrance into the new covenant is either still by physical birth or is by baptism, but neither of those options make sense in light of Hebrews 8 and Genesis 17, respectively. Rather, entrance into the new covenant is by spiritual birth, and believers are physically baptized as a sign of that having occurred, just like people in the old covenant were circumcised as a sign of having entered into the old covenant. We were bought by Christ to be his servants, and we enter his covenant at regeneration. Now, in my next video, I'll talk more about communion and how it relates to Passover and what that logically entails. I also plan to do a couple of live debates pretty soon with my friend Jordan Belcher, and then hopefully this summer I should have the time to start making videos on eschatology probably in mid-May. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. God bless.